Hi guys, this is Judy from Patterns for Pirates, and I am going to show you quickly how to do a French seam. So I have a quick little brunch blouse here. I've already put the neckline on, darts in, sewn up the shoulder seams, and here's my French seam on the shoulder seam. So there's the right side. There's the wrong side, and as you can see, it's really nice and tidy on the inside. It's a really great way to finish a seam if you want it to look beautiful on the inside. So your first stitch, what you're going to do, I'm going to sew down the sides. This is a dolman, so I'm going to be sewing down the bottom of the sleeve through the armpit down to the hem. And you're going to put your fabric wrong sides together, which I know that goes against your instinct as a seamstress, but wrong sides together, and you're going to sew with a narrow 1/4 inch seam allowance. And do nothing different besides make your seam allowance narrow. I tend to do French seams on lighter weight woven fabrics. I like that you can't see a serge seam on the inside if maybe it's slightly sheer. Now this one isn't sheer at all, it's a rayon. But sometimes you just want to top with the nicer finishes. Removing a little bit of stray little strands. Okay, so there's my first stitch. Excuse me. At a 1/4 inch seam allowance all down the side. Now, because P4P patterns have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm not going to do this the traditional way, which if you were doing a traditional paper pattern with a 5/8 inch, you could skip this trimming. But because we have a smaller seam allowance than a traditional paper pattern, I am going to trim my 1/4 inch down to an 1/8 inch. And this gives me that little 1/8 inch that you would have with a 5/8 seam allowance. If you're doing this on a pattern with a bigger traditional garment seam allowance, like 5/8, you could skip this step. If you happen to be sewing a pattern with a smaller seam allowance, then you would have to alter your pattern. So anything smaller than a 1/2 inch, you're going to have to add to your seam allowance. I guess not alter the pattern, just add to your seam allowance so that you have room to do a French seam. Okay, so I just trimmed it down to an 1/8 inch. Now I'm going to open it up just like this, where I can see my seam allowance, and I'm going to press along both sides all the way up. Then I'm going to flip it where it's right sides together like you would normally stitch. And I'm going to press it one more time, just so my stitch line is on the very edge. And then I'm going to sew at a 1/4 inch again. Now remember, if we hadn't trimmed, that wouldn't work. on a traditional garment pattern with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, you would stitch at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We stitched at a 1/4 inch, and then we trimmed it down to an 1/8. Now we're going to stitch again at a 1/4 inch. So I'm only going to press the very bottom, so I won't be too long. And actually I can flip you guys around to press with me. Again, I like to open mine up, and I like to press all my seams, whether I'm doing a French seam or not. Something that will make your garment lay much nicer with the woven. So I'm going to press all on this side. Now I'm going to go and press all on my other side. Especially along the curves, women are curvy, and this shirt is semi-fitted, which means it follows the curves. So it really helps to press along those curves that you're easing. Now I'm going to fold it right sides together and give it one more press so that that seam line is right on the edge. I don't want one side flipped more than the other. I want it right on the side, which it should naturally do if you press both sides. It should naturally do that. Just give it a little press to make it nice and crisp, easy to stitch. Okay, so there we go. You can see my seam line right on the edge. And I'm going to stitch again at a 1/4 inch. There we go, stitched again at a 1/4 inch. Now look how beautiful the inside of your garment looks. It's all finished, it's not going to fray. And then from the right side of the garment, it looks just like any other stitch line. But from the inside, it's nice and finished. All the raw edges are enclosed. Now you can press this to one side and top stitch, which is what I did on my shoulder seams. I pressed it to the back and top stitched along. So that's the top stitch is visible from the right side. And that's just your personal preference. If you want to press it and top stitch it, you can. If you want it to just hang out in there, you can do that as well. So a French seam. It's a very easy, very nice way to get a super beautiful finish on the inside. Bye guys.